It's the world this week. 4 days, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. Not an auspicious start. The world this week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Foreign editor of Daily Beast, and you've got your title straight at least. How's your week been?
Up until right now, it's pretty good.
Okay, all right. Also with us, Rachel Donadio, Paris correspondent for The Atlantic. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks as well to Aysegül Sürtz, independent journalist, who's just back from abroad.
Yes, I was in the US and then Turkey. I'm number 7.
Okay. And Gil Mahaley, editor-in-chief of Causeur, which is a French news and opinions website. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you.
For
the time being.
For the time being. All right. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. It's become a nightly ritual in Italy every night at 6 p.m.
È di 3.296 in tutte le regioni, con un incremento di 590. Il dato più importante
of the coronavirus, and the numbers for this Friday are grim. An extra 49 who've died. That brings the death toll to 197, with more than 4,600 cases, Rachel Donadio.
In Italy, yeah, it's spreading, but it's also the government has put, all public schools from kindergarten to university are closed. There's severe cutbacks on public gatherings. Football matches are being played without audiences. Emergency rooms are under strain, but it's testing the unruly government. But I also think that Italy is doing a pretty aggressive emergency response. And in contrast to kind of chaotic approach to this in the United States, I think, Italy seems pretty proactive.
Proactive. A grocery shop owner, Christopher Dickey, told the Daily Beast that that daily briefing, though, doesn't reassure the population. There's a rush, he says, every day into his grocery store after what he calls the War Bulletin.
Yeah, exactly. And people buy water, they buy the toilet paper, they buy hand sanitizer, which here in Paris, you can't find hand sanitizer anymore. But I think, we're going to reach a stage very quickly where people quit following these numbers day by day because the numbers are just going to get too high. You can talk about 900 people or 1,000 people. What are we going to do when it gets to be 10,000 people, 20,000 people? Are we going to follow those numbers day by day? No. We're going to have to adjust our lifestyle. And the idea that you can contain this virus in a modern Western society is probably not a credible idea. Or even, for instance, our correspondent in Japan was reporting that, yeah, they closed the schools and the subways are, guess what, full of children who are going out to have fun and play with each other and do things together. So let's say you close the schools. Are you going to keep all those kids at home? Do mom or dad or both of them have to stay home from work? You can't do it.
It's hard to know how to handle it. And I think the numbers can be reassuring, but they can also be distressing. We've been reporting in The Atlantic that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, have not been very forthcoming with the number of people tested in the United States and therefore with the number of cases. We know that more than 66,000 people have been tested in South Korea. We know that maybe 500 people have been tested in California. So, I also think that it becomes a question of government credibility, not just about the numbers, but about how information is being communicated.
Yeah, there's several aspects to this. How to adapt when schools and universities across Italy are shut for at least 2 weeks. The history teacher in the northwest town of Sarzana in Liguria, dispensing her lesson on World War II thanks to Google Hangouts. For how long can this be the new normal?
The question is political and economic. I know someone used to say that in Africa, no one dies of hunger. The people are dying of bad government. The problem here is how you address the crisis and also the resilience of the population. So I think that we have a lot of lesson to learn. I'm actually amazed by the lack of preparation. All the things that you've just mentioned people are improvising as they go. I thought that at least as far as schools and what you do, and how you decide whether or not to close borders or to semi-close them. I thought there were procedures, that there were books in cupboards, and you just open them.
So we had an emergency meeting of EU health ministers this Friday, and they said travel bans were beyond that. It doesn't make any sense. That's what they're saying.
No, I'm not a specialist. I think that since people carry this virus, limiting people's moving around seems to me logical. But I'm not a specialist. Someone can maybe it can move other ways. So I think it's not a bad idea to limit limit people's movement for the time. I'm just amazed by the fact that no one thought of what you're going to do when you send people to quarantines. No one thought about what you do when you are closing schools, and it's all over the world. We believe that there are these cupboards with procedures in case of war. When the enemy starts shooting, this is not the time when you decide what you do in order to make sure that there will be bread tomorrow.
And does that improvisation that you mentioned extend to your native Israel, where they decided this week on travel restrictions for those coming from contaminated areas?
I think that whatever is connected directly to emergency situation is well thought, because the country knows how to move from peace to war in a few hours. It means also that you need to replace people who are reservists. You need to do something with the schools, without teachers. So procedures go very, very far. So I guess handling that is okay, but no, it's a scenario that I'm amazed to think that no one thought really about this kind of scenario. And we are lucky that we are improvising on a relatively light disease, which is not very dangerous. It could have been worse, and I hope that we will learn the lessons, because we'll have a worse epidemic one day.
I think someone did think of the scenario, which is Hollywood, because it feels like we're living in a science fiction movie, and we've seen so many cases like this. But also, when I hear you speak, it's as if we are done with it, but we are not. Actually, there's so much that we don't know about coronavirus. I don't think that this is the end. I think this is just the beginning. And we don't know, speaking of war and peace, or we know who the enemy is, but we don't know at what moment that enemy is going to come and how to conquer that enemy. What I'm amazed by is actually how vulnerable we are, and how this has been showing us in the past few weeks how grand as a humankind we thought we were invincible. Okay, and here we are so interconnected, but we can't go to schools, we can't travel, no services. It affects every layer of the economy, tourism, and this is just the beginning. Really, I'm not trying to scare, because I think there's enough panic already out there, but I don't think that we're going to see this go in a couple of weeks or in April, like Mr. Trump says.
And even if it goes in the spring and the summer, it could easily come back in the fall.
But maybe by the time we'll have treatment. They are working on it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
All right. Part of that government response measures here in France include the requisitioning of face masks, the regulation of sanitizing hand gel prices at €2 for 50 millimeters, which, by the way, has got pharmacists accusing unscrupulous wholesalers of squeezing them.
What we've seen is laboratories, or so-called laboratories, trying to sell us gel at a ridiculous price. I got a quote for hand gel for €15 for a 75 milliliter bottle. So of course, if a pharmacist buys it for €15, they can't sell it for $3.
What do you think, Aishigul, sort of the French government's reaction?
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all that in a moment of emergency and crisis, there are people who are trying to make a benefit out of it. It comes back to what we're saying. It's a part of human nature. So I'm actually amazed that people are surprised by this.
It also reveals every government for what it is. So France is a strong centralized state with a strong centralized government asserting national plans. Italy is a little bit more chaotic, but it's actually a country that really comes together quite well in emergencies. China, pretty authoritarian. They want to send people back to work, but then monitor everyone's temperature using apps and just kind of surveil everybody. So it really, I think, it shows you the government, the nature of the government. The coronavirus shows you the nature of each government and how it responds.
All right, let's pick up on that point. By March the 1st, South Korea had run 100,000 tests. The United States, whose first case dates back to January the 23rd, fewer than 500, with kits from the Center for Disease Control that had sometimes proved faulty. Let's listen to Donald Trump's appointment, his vice president, as coronavirus czar.
We've got hospitals in affected areas and those that are requesting that have kits. We've got universities and state labs that now can perform the test on a requested basis. But our objective ultimately, and as quickly as possible, is to have tests made through these commercial laboratories and commercial providers that your local doctor, your CVS, your MedCheck is able to have a coronavirus test. And that isn't there yet. We're working to make that a reality.
So there he is giving a shout out to a private of the pharmaceutical company CVS, which runs drugstores across the United States, calling for commercial solutions to the problem.
It's the American way. As we were saying, every government handles this in the nature of every government.
Gil Mahaley saying how it's testing governments. How much of a test is it going to be for the Trump administration?
Oh, I think it's a huge test. I think that Trump looks like a fool. And I mean, he really looks like a fool. A lot of times he says foolish things, but they play well with his base. This time he looks like he's really lost. If you see the pictures of him, the film of him in the briefings about this virus, he's like this. I've never seen him so tied up. He is terrified, and he didn't even want to go to the CDC, to the Centers for Disease Control, because he's afraid he might get it. Remember, he's in his 70s now. One of the things we do know about the virus is that it hits hardest people who are over 65 years old. If you wanted a clear policy, the people you need to protect are the people in that age group.
So it is the Russians.
It is. No, the Russians would like to keep Trump. I mean, we know that.
No, but it
was meant for Biden, actually.
It's also the broader question. Before, when the year began, we all thought, healthcare is going to be one of those big issues on the campaign trail.
Well, it is a big issue for the Democrats. It's an issue that they can play. It's very hard to see how Trump will make healthcare an issue that he can support.
Do you think, in what Gil Mahaley was saying about how contingency plans, the idea that when you have a crisis like this one, you have a plan and that you have a public health policy that's nationwide and ready, that this is going to have
You mean all the things we don't have in the United States?
Is it going to mean a rethink in terms of what the role of government is in situations?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I think it'll definitely play to Bernie Sanders and his ideas for Medicare for all, although I think trying to implement that in the United States would be probably beyond the means politically and even economically. But it will also play to Biden, who says, we had Obamacare. It needed improvement. That's what we'll do. And then we have the Republicans who've done everything they can to destroy any kind of overall Medicare or medical coverage for the population and leave millions and millions of people uninsured.
And by the way, it's also testing the European Union, Rachel
But just one other thing.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for the tests in the United States? We're talking about $1,000 a pop
Mexico.
at the moment. Yeah.
Mexico.
Rachel Donati, it's testing the European Union as well, because the Italians are saying, hey, how about releasing to us face masks, which countries like France and Germany don't want to do?
I know. I mean, everything causes strain and tensions within the European Union, but these are countries with strong national healthcare systems and have leverage in ordering things and ordering medicines nationally in a way that in the United States, where everything is private, it's a lot more chaotic, the prices are high. We have a huge number of people in the United States who don't have health insurance and can't afford to get tested. So I think even if this does show the strains in the European Union, I think that national healthcare providers are in some ways in a better position to handle this.
Well, and things like face masks, it's kind of a bogus issue. Face masks don't do any good.
Well,
for most people.
Apparently they help remind you that you're not supposed to touch your face.
Yeah, they have a placebo effect, and they keep you from touching your face.
But in hospitals and in emergency rooms,
but that's not
needed.
That's not the issue.
But I think it's easy for people to focus on something you can understand, like a mask, as opposed to something you can't understand, like policy or numbers of viruses.
And it's like Vigipirate. People need to see this. It's reassuring.
They need to see the stepped up patrols for the other thing that's being put under strain, of course, is the world economy.
Yeah.
With, as was the case last week, stock markets headed south. Airline travel has already plummeted, with companies like Emirates and Cathay Pacific giving staff unpaid leave. For others, it's worse. UK regional budget carrier Flybe was already struggling. On Thursday, the coronavirus outbreak forced it into bankruptcy, and it's really looking dire. You mentioned earlier how it's like a Hollywood movie. Nobody's taking planes anymore.
Yeah, they're using drones in the sense of actually it would be very, at least if it could also stop some kind of war in the Middle East, that would be, at least coronavirus would have served a purpose with or without the mask, basically.
But the fact that we're not traveling anymore, that globalization is slowing down.
Slowing down? I don't know, because Christopher Dickey at the beginning was talking about our ways of life, in a way, the way we are used to living. I think we live in a society that's very not ready to give up on what it likes to do and on its own living standards. And I think, and I'm afraid that the day we'll say, okay, coronavirus is really done, or we have the remedy to it, everything will go back to what it was.
No, but I would argue that the day will come when we just say, we have flu and cold and coronavirus or COVID-19 season, and we'll just live with it. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go through a lot of upheaval in the next few months as we learn to do that, but eventually we will do that.
All right, a lot more to talk about. We have to take a break. We'll be right back. It's The World This Week.
Happy.
Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Rachel Donadio, Paris correspondent for The Atlantic. We're also in the company of Isa Gulsert, independent journalist, and Gil Mahaley, editor-in-chief of Causeur. Welcome back to all of you. We're talking about coronavirus. Well, it couldn't keep away Super Tuesday voters. In Texas, they sometimes waited 7 hours to cast ballots in the Democratic primaries, with a result that capped an incredible comeback for Joe Biden. To think that at this time last week, we were wondering whether Biden could win enough votes in South Carolina to kickstart his campaign. Barack Obama's former vice president proved so convincing that moderate rivals, one by one, dropped out, and he ran the board with 10 wins in 14 states, leapfrogging Bernie Sanders as the favorite.
And we're told, well, when you got to Super Tuesday, it'd be over. Well, it may be over for the other guy. People are talking about a revolution. We started a movement. We've increased turnout. And the turnout's turned out for us. And you want a nominee who's a Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, a proud Democrat, an Obama-Biden Democrat. Join us.
All right, so a lot of euphoria there. And it's true that it was the moderates that turned out on Super Tuesday. But can he sustain what they're now calling Joe-mentum, Rachel Donadio?
I don't know. We at The Atlantic have reported about Biden's stammer and how that's sometimes why he confuses words and things like that. I think the question is really, I don't know. I mean, I'm just struck by the age of all of the candidates. Biden is old. Sanders is old. Trump is old. They're old. It is going to be a very old race. And I think that coronavirus can affect who is going to win this competition. And I also think that how Trump handles the economy and handles the coronavirus will affect it too. I don't know whether Biden will sustain the momentum.
I think it's what we've seen this week too, is where are the votes of the Democratic Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, for instance, where are all those votes going to go? Is it going to go towards Biden? Is it going to go towards Sanders? Actually, we know for all of them except Warren, who hasn't said it yet, on which camp it's going to go. Whether whether she's going to endorse basically Bernie Sanders or Biden.
Yes, she matters. Let's just talk about that for a second, because this is the last of the major female contenders to drop out. And after Super Tuesday, the Massachusetts senator calling it quits. She's a progressive. She says she's going to take her time before committing to one of the two men left standing, who are quick to court her supporters.
Today is a difficult day for Senator Warren. I have known Senator Warren for some 20 years, and she is very focused, very disciplined, very hardworking. And tonight, I would simply say to her supporters out there, of whom there are millions, we are opening the door to you. We'd love you to come on board. Together, I think we can win this primary process. Together, we can defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of America.
So what do you think of that pitch?
Well, it's basically saying, come to daddy. Come here, basically. But the thing is that it's for Elizabeth Warren, I don't know, because Bernie Sanders, the people who support Bernie Sanders are not... and the ones who support Elizabeth Warren are not in the same, we cannot put them in the same basket, because usually the ones who support Warren are a little more, if I may say, educated or have an economic level that is a little higher. They're also a little older and less progressive than the ones who follow Sanders. So it's very difficult to think about where the vote is going to go. But what made me very sad this week is that I was one of those people who were, after Trump came to basically to the White House, what I saw with the women's movement in the United States, that gave me a lot of hope. A lot of hope in terms of going to the streets, in terms of going into politics, the young, the environment. And today, or yesterday, basically, to see the last female candidate drop out of the race just maybe made me say, well, I will, I think, see in my lifetime a woman president in the U.S. But at what point, I don't know.
When? Yeah.
Why is that, Chris Radicki?
Why were no women able to stay into the final round? Is that what the question is? I don't know. I mean, I think there's more than a glass ceiling. I think there's a lot of resistance. I think there's a lot of resistance, in fact, on the part of a lot of women. At the end of the day, the idea that this was part of Hillary Clinton's mistake. She assumed that all women would vote for her because she stood up for so many women's issues. And she lost very badly among a lot of female constituents. So I don't think it's a given that women always vote for women. So that didn't take you through. But I do think that Biden would be very smart to do a little bit better job of embracing Elizabeth Warren than we just heard Bernie doing. In fact, Elizabeth Warren would be a very good vice presidential candidate for Biden. She is not.
But you heard Rachel
radical.
Donadio complain that the current crop of candidates is above 70 years old. She's in that category.
But she can run faster than any of them, I'm pretty sure.
So 70-year-old women,
sneakers.
it's okay, but 70-year-old men, it's not?
Yes. I'm insisting on my double standard.
Go, Rachel,
But
go.
honestly, I mean, it is sad to see a woman yet again not make it to that next stage.
I think
and
she'd
all
be
the
a good-
pinky promises with all the girls. We had a really interesting story in The Atlantic about how women, so many double standards. If a woman acts extremely competent, people don't like it. You kind of have to act like you're a hot mess, and then it's like, oh, she's relatable. So I think that Warren's very
we're
much
see
like Warren,
if
large and in charge in some ways that turns some voters off, I'm afraid to say.
If Biden is smart, we will see a lot of women who were in the campaign and in the debates being brought in on his team and into his government. Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, they all should have a place in Biden's cabinet. And in fact, I think one of the things we got out of the debate, and I'm not the only person to say this, Tom Friedman, others have said it, is that it looks like a great cabinet. It looks like a really good cabinet of very smart people who are committed to moderately progressive ideas.
Well, Gil Mihaly, one of the conclusions you can draw is that in fact, a lot of those people who voted on Super Tuesday are former Republicans.
Well, I don't know. What I can say is that following it from a bit of a distance, I think the polls were very bad. I mean, the polling was not very accurate, which is quite surprising, considering the amounts of money that were poured in, and we're not in a national race. It's only the Democratic. And what's even more interesting is we know that since Citizen Kane, even in the United States, you don't transform money directly into power. It's not the rich, the wealthiest person that spend money who will get there.
Oh yes, we've forgotten about Michael Bloomberg.
We forgot about Michael Bloomberg.
He dropped out Wednesday. That was a long time ago.
Samoa.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. So it's more complicated than that. And the last thing I think is that the Democrats start to have a base, and this base is anything but Trump. I think that this is all the progressive agenda is going down, and now people are just asking who will read us from this president. And I think this is the main issue. It won't be health. It won't be. It just
Who can be Trump?
anything.
All right, no fighter jets in the skies over Syria's Idlib province this Friday. It's a tense truce that has gone into effect since Turkey's president visited the Kremlin Thursday and agreed to de-escalate hostilities between Turkish troops inside of Syria and the Moscow-backed forces of Bashar al-Assad.
We don't always agree with our Turkish partners on the events in Syria, but each time there's a critical moment, thanks to the high level of bilateral ties we have achieved, we have always managed to find common ground on the disputed questions.
We kind of almost want to ask, what's this whole week been about? Because we saw the escalation was serious. The Turkish military suffered casualties, hit back very hard, and it ends the way it seems to always do, with a sit down in Moscow or Sochi or Astana.
Again, I think it doesn't end. From Sochi in 2018 to today, basically, these ceasefires, they don't last. They're completely vulnerable. One of the reasons I think they're very fragile is that they forget that at that sitting table, there shouldn't be only a Putin and an Erdogan, that there are more players in this than that. I don't believe the deal that basically more or less was signed, which is the 3-point deal after the 6 hours between Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan, is basically a blank page. If I were to give you my blank page, it would be exactly the same thing.
Wait a minute, they've agreed to things like joint patrols along that strategic M4 highway.
Yes, but something that Rachel said before on another subject, it's all about how you present the information. Turkey has been presenting this whole deal of sitting, Erdogan has something of when he's sitting at the table with the big guys, let's say, of Russia, he feels like he has done something very strong. But when Turkey was already at the 30-kilometer, there was nothing about the safe zone conversation. It's basically just allows Russia to have more grasp on the Idlib region, and it doesn't bring anything. The thing which is very different, however, is that in Turkey...
it slowed the advance of Bashar al-Assad's army.
Yes, but with Putin on the table. How much are you going to really slow that? But the thing which is very difficult for Erdogan, I think, on this time, compared with Sochi, for instance, is that in Turkey you can give a lot of arguments about why you're going to war. It's very easy to wake up that nationalism, that patriotic thing, but when you lose soldiers on the ground, and just like the way that Turkey has been losing in the past month, it's very difficult to continue with the argument of the war. And that's why I think Erdogan knew from the very start that he can't stay on the same level as Russia. He just can't.
Except that, Gilmaheli, Turkey has a border with Syria, Russia does not.
Yes, but the thing is that there is one player who has clear objectives. This is Assad. He wants to go back to the situation in the beginning of 2011. It's very clear. We know where he wants to go to. We know who he needs to get rid of. All the other players, and so his allies, they deal with him for what is their take on that. But the objectives are very clear. All the other players have a much difficult. What does Erdogan hopes to get at the? What is his end game? Where does he want to end his? What will be an acceptable deal for him? It's not clear, and it's very difficult to engage resources when you don't have a very, very clear, simple objective. So just one thing to say. We see here actors playing just, it's a bit of a slogan, but it's clear. We have a 19th century diplomacy going on between people who are playing pure power play. And Europe is not...
It's the eve of World War I here?
Sorry?
It's the eve
No, I'm not trying to say that. It's not that simple. But we're talking about people who are only about power.
And the show of force, basically.
It's part of the thing. I mean, it's part of the thing. Power is, I mean, the most ingenious LOB in the history of geopolitics is what Russia is doing in Syria with 30 airplanes and 4,000 men. It's a leverage. I mean, bankers in Wall Street will die for that kind of leverage effect. I mean, with so little equity, they have huge dividends.
All right, but there's...
Just the last thing is, what's happening here is that Syria is stepping on the toothpaste tube in Idlib, and the toothpaste is going out in Greece. And on the other side, there's really there's border, but behind the border, there's no boss.
All right, you bring up an important point, and for that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, or rather, a drawing is worth 1,000 words. This is Financial Times illustrator Ingram Pin's take on the region, and there you have behind Erdogan the bombs going off in Syria's Idlib province, and there, because he made that announcement a week ago, saying he was letting the refugees and migrants go through to the EU. The look of shock and horror, Christopher Dickey, on the faces of the new European leaders.
Well, look, there is shock and horror because they understand perfectly well that if they saw anything like the influx of refugees that they saw in 2015, it would basically kill the European Union. It just doesn't have enough political stability to deal with that anymore. But that really isn't what is happening. The toothpaste from Idlib is not what's going to the border with Greece. What's happening is Erdogan is putting them on buses and taking them out of Turkey. And we're talking Afghans, Iranians, Tunisians, Moroccans, all kinds of people. He just wants to give Europe fits. Now, what is Europe supposed to do with these people? Is it supposed to say, they're all refugees, we can take them all in? What is happening, in fact, is this is playing into the hands of all the far-right movements in Europe.
But why not? See, I have an issue with that. When you say that the European Union is not ready to welcome these migrants, yes, the European Union and the US is ready. I'm not saying that what Turkey is doing is correct. You're absolutely right.
You mean they can, or they're ready to do it politically? Because they're not ready to do it politically.
Yes, but you cannot, as a European Union or as the West, say we stand for human rights and all those things. One second. And at the same time say, well, you know what, poor Greece, we're going to help you because basically if these migrants come to Greece, then they will come to us. They have to basically show leadership to Turkey saying, you know what, you can no longer use as a card of fear, of making us fearful of these migrants, and we do welcome them. Let's see then what Erdogan will be able to do.
Rachel Donadio.
That would be an interesting thing to happen.
They can do it.
But what's happening now?
I cannot accept the whole thing of the EU not having
You're talking about what they should be doing.
What's happening now is that there's a difference between what Europe should be doing and what is actually happening, which is when people come on boats to Greece, often to Lesbos, they are held in the Moria refugee camp where I spent some time in October. There are more than 20,000 people there in shockingly substandard conditions
in the heart
of
Greece.
Europe.
They don't want to stay in Greece anyways.
So now what Greece has been doing is doing creative interpretation of international law and saying it will deport people without actually giving them asylum hearings, which is not.
And the EU's been backing them, and the UNHCR is blasting the EU for doing that.
Right. So again, it's just kind of bad faith and doublespeak in every possible direction. But I think what Erdogan wants is those images of people on boats that we've been seeing all week. It is those pictures of boats that kind of, send
the ones where the Greek Coast
shockwaves
Guards fired warning shots at that dinghy.
or just kind of they.
What's the impact? I don't see the impact. I don't see the impact
because you don't see it yet because they're not being let in.
I think the question is what So what does Erdogan want? Does he want more money in the way that in 2016
No.
Germany gave him money?
I mean, he knows who's to blame. The problem is with Russia and Putin, but he can't say that because his politics. I mean, he's in a very curious situation. He wants help from Europe, but he bought an air defense system from Putin, whose plane he shot down 5 years ago. But
Meanwhile, the refugees or the immigrants or the migrants come to Greece, and Greece says it needs EU help, and the EU actually isn't really helping. And then the far-right politicians look at the pictures of the boats and say, vote for us, we're going to close the borders. And I mean, it's like all interconnected.
We're running short on time, and I couldn't let Gil Mahaley get away without asking about what happened in Israel this week. Maybe it won't be third time lucky after all. The country's longest ever serving prime minister giving a victory speech after a third snap general election under a year. But Benjamin Netanyahu is still 3 seats shy of that 61-seat majority in parliament. And by the way, his corruption trial starts in 11 days. Now, the good news for Bibi, his main rival from the blue and white coalition, Benny Gantz, slipped in the polls. He doesn't have any path, it seems, to 61 seats.
No, but he can block any attempt of Netanyahu to stay in power. He can do one of two things: have a minority government, because they can mobilize 62 or 61, 62 actually, 62. More than half of parliament will vote against Netanyahu without being able to come together to support an alternative. But they can block Netanyahu. And at the same time, they can vote laws and they can take over the parliament with procedures. They can get rid of the president of the parliament. So they have someone who's on their side who will facilitate things.
So you're saying a fourth snap general election in a row?
I don't know. I think that the mastermind here is Avigdor Lieberman. He understood a year ago that this is his window of opportunity to get rid of Netanyahu. And he said that there will not be fourth elections. So I think what he intends to do is to try and gain some time and see what's happening inside the Likud when they start to realize that Bibi is over. And his big plan...
Is he really going to be over? Because Israelis are saying, so what if he's got a corruption trial? If we still like him as prime minister inside the Likud, they're saying that.
Yes, but if he can't establish a government, and if a series of laws will be voted by a hostile parliament against him, not allowing him to escape his trial, at one point he will go to court, and the television will only speak all the day about what happened there. So at one point, people will start to say, okay, thank you, but maybe someone else will take your place. And I think that the big idea is to create, because one thing is certain, the left in Israel is about 10%. What we see here is wars against all kinds of right-wing governments, parties. So if Netanyahu is on the way of a huge coalition of the right, then sooner or later, he will be gone.
All right, we shall see. I want to thank you, Gil Mahaley. I want to thank as well Rachel Donadio, Isagul Surt, Christopher Dickey. Stay with us. Media Watch is here. And we say hello to Catalina Marchon. How are you?
Hi, Francois. How are you?
Not so bad.
So here we have are the images up? Can we see them?
They'll be up soon.
Okay. So
I forgot. We're on the eve of International Women's Day.
Exactly. So this upcoming...
oh, those are the Israeli elections.
Yeah.
There
well,
we go.
this upcoming Monday, Mexico has organized a day-long women's strike in light of International Women's Day this Sunday. These protests have been organized in order to demand action from the government in the country's crisis over escalating femicide crisis. These protests have been fueled by two horrific murders that shook the country this month. These were the murders of Ingrid Escamilla, 25-year-old Ingrid Escamilla, and 7-year-old Fatima Aldrijet. But they're not the only women who have been murdered in the country. It's a crisis that the country has been dealing with for a very long time. Just in 2019, more than 1,000 killings were officially classified as femicide in the country, which is up 10% from the year before. So women in Mexico are being urged to completely disappear for 24 hours on Monday, and this is the official poster for the protest. It's with the hashtag Un Día Sin Nosotras, which means 1 day without us, or also 1 day without women. So they are urging women not to go to school, not to go to work, not to go to stores, cafeterias, not even to use online applications or even streaming services, public transportation, just not to do anything and completely disappear. But this would obviously have an impact in the country's economy, as how it would work without women, who make up 40% of the country's workforce. And this recent study shows that 60% of the companies will support this national strike on Monday, and as well as 42% of these companies will also pay women who decide not to show up. So there is support for women that want to join this strike and not go to work and just disappear for the day. Some of the companies, this is a list of some of the companies that will support the strike, some big names such as Walmart, Google, Mexico, Scotiabank, Santander, Bank of Mexico.
All right, and one other story, though, before we go, because a week ago we had the storm over Roman Polanski picking up a lot of prizes at the French equivalent of the Césars. You've been looking at Woody Allen's upcoming memoir.
Yes, so this just adds on to the Me Too saga. He has an upcoming memoir that is going to be published in April by Hachette Publishing Group. In light of this, many of its workers staged a walkout yesterday in protest of his book that will be released in April. Here we can see an image. It was more than 75 employees who went to New York's Rockefeller Center against the publishing of this book. Why is this controversial? This is the same company that published Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill, that was a memoir on the Me Too movement. And he has also accused his estranged father, Woody Allen, of abusing his sister, Dylan Farrow, back in the 90s. Here we have his statement where he has cut ties with the publishing. He has cut ties with Hachette Publishing Group, saying that he cannot work with them in good conscience, and that they were never contacted. His sister Dylan was never contacted to respond to any denial of the abuse she suffered at the hands of Woody Allen.
All right, so that's a controversy that's going to run. Many thanks, Catalina. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.